Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. We are going to talk about business and mindset and all sorts of stuff that's going to help you move the needle. I want to welcome to the show today's guest, Kraig. Welcome to the show, Kraig.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's talk a little bit as we're kicking things off about your entrepreneurial journey, because you have a lot of irons in the fire and a lot of successes behind you, probably some hard knocks along the way. Let's start there. Let's explain to our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you got going on.
Absolutely. And big emphasis on hard knocks. No question about that one, Alicia. You fittingly read my mind. I think that entrepreneurialism started for me early in life. I graduated college and things like that. And I had my first couple of jobs in the sales profession, mostly at two tech companies. One that was big Fortune 100 company. The other one was a startup, kind of a venture capital startup. At age 29, I took the plunge, founded my first company, and in 4 short years, sold it. It grew it, I should say, to $30 million in annual sales. So it was very quick, hockey stick type growth. It was as painful as it was joyful, and sold it. Exited for a good, just a good situation. Exited to our most strategic marketing partner, funded in some extent with a private equity company. And man, oh man, did I learn a lot along that way. There were some, like some old sports show from when I was a kid. The opening trailer would say something like, "The thrill of victory and the agony of defeat." And I think those 4 years was an equal distribution of both of those. It culminated in a nice way, not perfect. The structure of that deal could have been different. I could have been wiser. I wish I'd had more mentors around me to help me with so many different things there. But my plunge into the entrepreneurial world started at the ripe old age of 29, and I've continued on ever since.
And here you are today, and you have a couple companies currently, and obviously you've learned a lot. I mean, we're all still learning, but I'd imagine that if we extract from you some real nuggets, there are going to be some doozies.
Well, you are right. We all are learning a lot, aren't we? And in fact, I think the late Steve Jobs, have you read his autobiography, Steve Jobs?
I have not.
I recommend that book to you and your audience. What a fantastic book. If there's one takeaway from that book, it's embracing the power of external perspectives. And, in studying his life, who's really probably the father of modern day inventiveness, our lives are sort of governed by these iPhones and all of it. But in studying his life, I've learned that if you or I were a senior executive on job staff and we were running a big business, but we were not engaging with world-class consultants, if we were not attending world-class events, if we were not curating world-class content and distributing it out to our team, we barely last 3 minutes on staff with Steve Jobs. So you are right. This whole idea, I think, of embracing the power of external perspectives. Put another way, Rick Smith in his book, The 5 Patterns of an Extraordinary Executive, the first item of his research that he identifies is that the intellectually curious executive will always outperform the executive who is not. So, yes, ma'am, there have been a lot of key learnings along the way. And I've found that trying to look up to others who have an insatiable appetite for curiosity is one of the most precise ways to make headway in that department.
One of the things that really excites me is the entrepreneur who has that spark, that fire in them, that they're that visionary. They see things that other people don't see, and they're willing to do the work to create it. But it's not just the external game of business. It's got to be that internal game also. I'd love to talk to you a little bit
Mm.
about your own internal game because you've obviously had some big wins and we talked about
Mhm.
some of those hard knocks, and I'm sure you're still with multiple companies, you're going to have some growing
Mm.
pains from time to time.
Yes,
In terms of the inner game, what guidance would you share?
that is a brilliant question. I That's a question I pondered, continue to ponder, and I think it's a great idea for all of us to ponder. My first reaction to that is a very simple statement, but I think a very profound one potentially, particularly in today's society and culture, and that is that the mind has got to be brought back to its right order, and that we need to learn to structure our lives in such a way where we can maintain orderliness and orderliness in the contours of our minds. And I can tell you, it is a difficult thing today in today's culture. And that's in part because of the vast global commercialization of the internet. And don't, you know, I will be the first to sing the praises of the internet in terms of efficiency. And when I travel internationally, I can push buttons and have drivers pick me up. And boy, oh boy, did those sorts of things help me. But at the same time, the harm associated with with the internet is a reality as well. And I've learned that in order for me to function at a higher capacity and be able to do exactly what you just described, be that visionary, find those new markets, be able to tinker, be able to try, be able to not be afraid to fail, be able to pitch things that might fail, be able to think up things that no one else has thought of. I've got to get to a place of quiet time, of solitude, and allow my mind to be brought back to a place of orderliness. And I can tell you that in terms of like a real key takeaway is about 5 years ago, I I really discovered rather intuitively, I discovered that either the internet is going to rule me or I am going to rule it. Like either I'm going to live every idle moment scrolling and news feeds, etc., or I am going to unplug and take time to think. So about 5 years ago, I made a commitment to unplug and think for 4 hours daily. When I say think, it's more than think, it's prayer, it's meditation, it's really deep dive reflection. And I made a commitment that I would unplug 4 hours at least 5 or 6 days a week. And that then, in doing that, that led me to a place of physical exercise, which has helped me tremendously. I could talk a lot about that. I won't, but the 4 hours in effect was hiking up in the bluffs where I live, and then culminating and going to the fitness center at this beautiful small private campus and getting a workout. And those 4 hours of being unplugged daily for 2 years were priceless. For the next 3 years, COVID lockdowns ended, life, the demands of life and travel, took over. But I remain committed still at least 2, 3, 4 times a week of unplugging 4 full hours. And if I can only get unplugged for an hour or two, the benefits are profound. And so all that to say, I guess bringing my mind back to a place of right order And avoiding information dissemination at the expense of vitality has been absolutely vital, or I should say key, for me to do some of the things that you just asked me about.
I love this take. We have had this conversation about the value of mindset and the value of, taking a retreat or just finding a way to bring yourself back into your center.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of people who are busy with the busy work and not actually being productive. And the mind is, like you just talked about, it's a fucking mess. It's just a clusterfuck in most people's mind. They're, they're obsessed with what's going on in my inbox or social media or the news, and we're not productive in that state of mind. We're not highly creative in that state of mind. We're essentially operating in a basically a state of fight or flight, which is not conducive to creativity or productivity. And yet it becomes addictive. So we see, a lot of people talking about this, and you should do um, what do they call it? Detox, a technology detox or a social media detox. Uh, and the interesting thing is, we can know that intellectually. And I see a lot of people who are being driven by deep-rooted sense, like a deep-rooted sense of scarcity, whether that's financial or this fear that they have to, prove something. It could be any number of different things that are really these unhealthy motivators. So we intellectually know that we should do these things for ourselves, and yet there are a lot of people who just simply will not do it because they're still operating in that fight flight because of those unhealthy drives. Now, maybe you can speak to this from experience because I know that you've created a lot of success for yourself. Uh, for somebody who is going through that, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's a really good question. I think if I could go back to my younger self in my youth and give my younger self some advice, I would probably say, Kraig, young Kraig, your thoughts determine the outcomes of your life. And, you know, what I've learned is that thoughts, they lead to words, then words lead to actions, then actions, when happening continuously, turn into habits, and habits ultimately determine our destiny. And it all goes right back to our thought life. And so as we begin to make choices, our choices actually make us. And if our choices are made correctly, with integrity, with forethought, then ultimately the outcomes of our entire life is going to be very, very different. I found, I mentioned this earlier, but regular intervals of stillness, they do lead to self-reflection and clear-minded thinking. And I think that a commitment to regular intervals of stillness has led me to, frankly, catalytic escalations of imaginative creativity that I could never have come up with without the period of stillness. And I think that I would say to your audience, I guess I'd go back to that. Your thoughts determine the outcomes of your life. Thoughts become words, words become actions, actions become habits, habits determine destiny.
So now we're speaking my language here.
Yes, we are. I've been studying you a little bit, girl, and I like what you're delving into some interesting stuff. I love it.
Well, the fact is, if someone is really honest with themselves, now this and self-honesty, wow, over it can be stated, but it's oftentimes not really fully understood, and certainly not fully executed. Self-honesty means you've got to look very honestly, very objectively at what you're doing, what you're thinking, what your defaults are,
Hmm.
right? Including those bad habits, right? So my husband is starting a new business, and it is going to be a local business, and he's going and he's getting, like, his these fancy graphics on his truck and stuff like that. Well, fun story here. He's come a long way, but he still has a little bit of that temper. And so somebody's driving like a jackass, what does he do? Right? He starts swearing, and occasionally the horn is going off, there.
Sure.
And so what I started to do to jar him out of that and try to pattern interrupt and break that is I say the name of his business, because we're so unconscious. That programming is so habitual, like you were saying. And it takes a tremendous amount of conscious awareness to call out those habitual destructive thoughts and patterns and behaviors and responses that need to be changed in order for us to be that more successful, empowered version of ourselves. Our thoughts really are powerful, and our mental conditioning determines, do you actually believe that you can achieve the kind of things that you've achieved? So
Um,
it's worth the effort.
I love that. I love that exercise that you gave him, and you mentioned his company name, and I think what you were probably saying to him is that, hey, words matter, and your brand matters, and your company matters, and our actions matter. And so I think that was a wonderful strategy. And I think the more that all of us understand that our words matter and our actions matter and the way we conduct, in fact, I have found that, you know, I, I want to live a life of victory, and I want to live a life, but I've discovered that if I want that public victories don't really tell the story as much as private victories. And the more I experience private victories in life, the greater the public victories, ultimately real victories, arrive. And I was talking with my nephew about a year or two ago. It was last year. He came down for a visit. We hopped in my convertible, and I drove him around where I went to high school and where his dad went to high school. And he just, showed him some things. And his name is Braden. And Braden was at that time, I think 12 or 13. And we starting to, pick up some language from school that was not quite gentlemanly. And I kind of said to him, I said, Braden, I think he was kind of using the language to impress me, like he's grown up now. And I said, Braden, I'll tell you, if you clean that language up and you don't drop the foul language, you might be surprised. The girls will probably notice you a lot more differently than they will everyone else. And he goes, really? Tell me more about that, Uncle Kraig. And it led into a discussion of how words matter. And I explained to him how we're at a time in society and culture where using words that are well thought out and well carved out maybe matter more than maybe any time in history. As much we have so many things sort of careening out of control. But I didn't mean to go down a rabbit path too far. I just wanted to reinforce words matter. I love that exercise that you gave your husband. And I think more of that is effective for most of us.
Well, it's all about those associations. So for you, I'm sure, you have some pretty strong associations with your different businesses, with your goals, those inner victories as well as those outer victories. And the more emotion that we have that's
Mm.
associated with those things, the more leverage and power there is in utilizing that to make some of those inner adjustments and corrections.
I think you make a very good point. Um, just hearing your language there reminds me of just another concept that I've been meditating and reflecting on so I can connect myself emotionally with what's right for me. And that is learning to structure my life to find my magnificent obsession. And I've found that most obsessions may lead to bondage, but for every person, there's one obsession, maybe more than one, that leads to beauty and leads to greatness. For example, my friend Bono of U2, when I talk with Bono, he doesn't talk about rock music. He doesn't talk about all the tremendous accolades that he's won in the music world. He talks about his real passion, his real magnificent obsession, which is defending the poor of the earth. The late Dick Kiphart, who's probably the father of all investment bankers in Chicagoland, he sort of ran William Bank, a very successful investment bank there. When I used to do advisory and consulting work, I did a lot of work in his portfolio. When you go into Dick's office, the late Dick, when you would go into his office, he had one of those old, what do you call those things? One of those old photo albums, like an old physical photo album. And he would show you all of the wells and all of the clear, clean hygiene and water distribution that he'd created in countries in Africa with his wealth. He's a very wealthy man, but he lived very, very humbly. And he was more proud of defending the weak and the vulnerable, protecting them from the number one killer in the world, which is lack of hygiene and lack of fresh water. He was far more proud of that than his Wall Street wheeling and dealing. And I think that, you know, Alicia, when we find that magnificent obsession, and when we really start channeling our energy, our efforts into that, it doesn't have to be philanthropic work, whatever it is. When we find it and when we begin cultivating a life that will lead to that beauty and that greatness, so much goodness occurs as a result of it.
I agree. This has been a fantastic conversation. Kraig, how can our listeners connect with you?
You know, the best way they could reach me is probably on my LinkedIn profile, Alicia. It's Kraig Kleeman, Kraig with a K, Kleeman with a K. I tend to check it at least a couple of times a week. So that might be the one evergreen way that's going to be available for your audience.
Awesome. This has been a ton of fun. I know you're recovering from, what'd you say, bronchitis,
Little bronchitis, yes.
but you were able to articulate so much value. So I really want to thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That is very kind of you, Alicia. Thank you very much for having me.
And of course, got to thank all of our listeners. You know, we're doing this for you. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.